1, 2, testing, testing, 1, 2. Hi, good evening, everybody. I Team Open Clock Club tells me we do have an audience, so that's really cool. I've got Ian and Sam and Ken, so evening, and welcome back to our everybody. Usual Team Open Clock Club tells me we and in fact still like a good old still struggling with the technology. Anyway, good evening. And if you're new here, because we've got a lot of new people on our Facebook group, then a super special welcome. And these events really are pretty informal, and they are what they say. They're a live stream. In the last kind of block of live streaming, we worked on an early 19th century European toll case clock movement that actually needed a lot of work, and it's still got a small amount of work to be done to be finished, and I'll post that on Facebook. But we're kind of exhausted what was new there, so did all sorts on that. Anyway, you can see that on our archive. So yeah, if you're there, please fire away with the questions. Although I do warn you that this next couple of weeks or 3 weeks or something is going to be me asking more questions of you, because we're going to be working on an American clock. And as much as one might argue that a clock is a clock, I've got very little actual bench experience of working on these objects, so it'll be a learning experience for us all. So if you remember back to when we started our long case clock, our tall case clock, we kind of set the scene before we start. And I think this is really important. I won't labor it as I did last time, because you can go back and look at how we began the last project. But of course, I think it's always useful to spend some time with the object and consider it. And this is what I would call kind of part of the approach. It is not that useful often if you just kind of dive straight in, because you lose objectivity. Now, we're all interested in the cogs and the sprockets, or whatever you call them, but actually, I think there's a healthy relationship with objects if we kind of push them away and bring them really close and push them away, and there's this kind of orbiting sense rather than sort of just diving right into it. Anyhow, this clock came to me through one of my clients, and I repaired a different long case clock for them. And inevitably, when you take a clock back when you're in repair, people rather kindly always say, or invariably say, oh, by the way, we've got another clock, or we've got a neighbor that's got a clock. Anyway, this person had 2 or 3 clocks in the garage, one of which I'm repairing commercially, one of which is kind of reached the end of the road. But this one, I said, well, I'm not interested in it per se for my own, to buy it or anything, but it would make a really great live stream, because never talked much about American clocks. And when we wrote, I've got like 2 minutes in, so I mentioned the book in case I forget. I haven't mentioned it yet. When we wrote our book, How to Repair Pendulum Clocks, Volume 1, Getting Started, one of the kind of questions that came back to us almost immediately once we'd started getting sort of readers is, what do I do next? Well, the clock in the book is a single train Smiths Enfield mantle clock. So the obvious thing is to work on a 2-train Smiths Enfield clock. Then what? Maybe a French clock, maybe European 30-hour and 8-day duration long case clocks, and then fusee clocks. And that's all well and good, particularly if you happen to live here in England, where those clocks are still relatively plentiful and relatively, I say, using the term advisedly, affordable. However, we've got Facebook members from all over the world, really massively encouraging. And some good correspondence only yesterday, struck this morning, from one of our members in Cuba. So all really cool. And it's stating the obvious that in America, there are a lot of American clocks that are relatively sort of accessible, if you like. So this was great for me when this clock cropped up, because I thought, brilliant, I can learn something. I can demonstrate my approach, which is going to be the same as to the long case clock. We're going to take what I call very broadly a conservative approach. So we're going to restore the clock to working order. And that's basically taking it apart, washing it, putting it back together, and oiling it, and any repairs that we need as we go along, but no sort of active refinishing or anything. So that's going to be my approach. The clock's been here for a few months now, so I've kind of been walking around it and thinking about it. And I think that this is going to be, more of a two-way street than the long case clock, because I was kind of on familiar territory there. And we start here. Question.
Sam wants to know, how do you determine when a clock has reached the end of the road?
A good question, Sam. How do you determine when the clock's reached the end of a road? I suppose when does it change its status? Well, these things are fluid, so it's different things for different people at different times, and things can be brought back from the sort of brink of relicdom. Again, this clock that was in Cuba was a good example of that. It's a clock movement, but with no motion work, no striking levers, no case, no pendulum, no hands, no dial. what is that thing? Which of course is a really cool question. And one answer to that might be a clock is a thing that was made to keep time, display the time, and therefore it still should show the time. I don't buy that, I'm afraid, one bit really. The clocks we work on are not new making, so they're all historic clocks. And let's say we've got an early 19th or late 18th century clock like the one we're going to be working on today. For me, the point of that thing is totally open to negotiation. Certainly don't get it as a clock that should keep time and run and display the time. So I think it's a point of negotiation. Typically, there are what used to be called stakeholders or interested parties. And they might be owners, they might be the repairer, they might be collectors, they might be institutions. There might be a set of professional rules, what people call ethics, sort of like professional practice. So there's a whole soup of fluid influences on that decision. And of course, there is no wrong or right decision. In this case, of course, inevitably that question of is it worth it crops up. And of course, that is in its own right a massive question, because it gets us thinking about values and what these things mean and what they're worth, whether that's monetary or all sorts of philosophical or sociological values that objects hold, if you like. So in this case, the clock was a little French mantle clock with a platform escapement, cylinder escapement. And the answer to that is, how much is it going to cost to repair that clock? In this case, and I'm not saying this is definitive by any means, but this is how the conversation went. How much is it going to repair that clock? Okay, it's going to be a few £100. Will it keep time? Well, it depends what you mean by keeping time, but 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, the cylinder escapement is going to be worn. Do you fit a new platform? I'm not going to fit a new platform. Therefore, spending, I don't know, £200, £300, £400, it's going to sit on the mantelpiece. It's not going to be used. So from my perspective, a kind of agreed position, there's no point in repairing it. However, put in a different set of hands of so-called ownership and different repairer, then you would come to a completely different conclusion. However, there are good examples where things become relics effectively. It's not that they're not viable, but the kind of will. And what's the point? And I think this is a really important point, that because if you constantly question what a thing is, and you kind of constantly question what's the point of that thing, then an object, as I said, it becomes much more fluid. So not writing it off, but just saying, for now, this is not the best use of my energy, their money. What do we get out of it? And conservation, as you know, Sam, is a cost-benefit exercise. And that cost is cost in the kind of really widest sense, and benefit in the widest sense. And I suppose in the case of this clock, which I keep peeking across at, it's still on the shelf up there, the cost-benefit exercise of taking it apart and repairing it just didn't figure out under this particular set of circumstances. And maybe again with the American clock we're looking at, the value to me in it is because it's a really great demonstration, as in a kind of teaching, sounds a bit pompous, but in this kind of dialogue-based situation where we've got people who are interested in learning, people who are going to give. I think this is really, really cool, because we can get a nice, easy win, positive outcome, and hopefully we all learn something of it. So here's my first question. Is this pendulum bob, which is cast iron, you can see it's got some gold paint, I presume it's gold paint and not gilding, that remains. Presumably when it was new, it was completely gilt. So there's one question, was it gold painted all over? Well, the second question is, what does this decoration a mean? Because it must mean something. It's not just random. It's sort of foliate with some wooden sort of cross members and some more foliage down the bottom. What does that mean? The clock is Ingram, I think, is that how it's pronounced anyway? Ingram clock, and the model is Lancet. And thank you to Matthew Condon for sending me a photograph of that from a great catalogue by Tran Du Lee. I can't show you a page of the catalogue because I don't have copyright authority on it. But anyway, there's a really great book that's got a photograph of this clock in it, of the original catalogue. So we know how much it cost when it was new, and we know what the model name and model number was. So that's cool. So there's your first question, internet. What does this decoration mean? Because I'm sure it means something.
How much did it cost?
Yeah, it cost. So I'll read, because I don't think that's breaking the copyright. It's dial 5 inches, height 11 inches, length of base 17.5 inches. So obviously that's interesting that they put that at the top of the description, because obviously people want to measure up their mantelpiece and see if it's going to fit. That's really important. We've been talking today about most exciting conversation ever about buying white goods. And of course, the first question is it going to fit in our space that we've got? So it's 8-day, half-hour, low strike cathedral gong, patent regulator, whatever that means. There's a patent somewhere. Oh, I see, that's the regulator, yeah. Cast sash, don't know what that means. White or new fancy dial. I think we've got the new fancy dial version. It was $8.50. I don't know what year it was. I guess it's late 19th century, and it's called the Lancet. And it was, we've got two numbers actually. It's model number 701. Oh, it's 1899. So it's bang on the turn of the century. So it's 120 years old. I'll just going to weigh the pendulum, Bob, because on the Facebook group, we get a lot of people who get clocks and they haven't got pendulums with them. And one of the questions is, how heavy should the pendulum, Bob, be? And the answer is, I've got no idea. Well, this one is 87 grams or thereabouts. So hopefully that's useful information for somebody. Remember that we won't get into it now, but the period of pendulum is independent of mass. But if you've got a clock like this and you are looking for a pendulum, Bob, there you go. So easy fix there, nothing to do other than a bit of washing. And here's the bezel. Now I've got, here's my next question. So this bezel is brass. And again, it has this remains, I think here it isn't gold paint. I think this is lacquer because it's degraded. I think it's probably shellac lacquer that's degraded to that kind of gold color. Maybe it was tinted when it was new. So again, just a kind of washing exercise. You can see the glass is a bit grubby. But my question is, the glass is retained by a bit of wire on the inside with blobs of soft solder. Is that, I'm not interested in changing it, but is that how it was when it was new? I guess it probably was, although the solder looks quite fresh. And also the joint has been repaired as well. But what surprised me about this was how heavy the glass is. So I'll just measure it.
It's 87 grams. How many ounces is that?
31, is it? Avoirdupois ounces. So 31.60. 2 2/3 ounces.
2 2/3. Ken said it should be 2.2 ounces.
Right. Okay.
So it's,
yeah, I mean, it's kind of in the ballpark. I think that's the proper pendulum for the clock. And remember, as I said before, that mass, the period of a pendulum is independent of mass. So people get a bit obsessed by the actual weight of them. But it's interesting to know. So this is 3mm glass. It just seems kind of like quite chunky for a pretty insubstantial bezel, and all the weight resting on that joint, and the joint is broken or it's broken away. In fact, you can see here, look, there's some filing. So it's had, something's happened to it. But my question is, was it originally thinner glass than 3 mil? 3 mil is just under 1/8 of an inch, isn't it? So probably wouldn't have been as thin as 16ths, but it might have been 3/32 of an inch. Anyway, there's a question for you. If you've got a clock like this, would you mind measuring the thickness of the glass if you think the glass is original? In fact, looking at the glass, it's incredibly flat. So I presume this is float glass. 3 mil, so just under 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters. So I'm going to probably have to take the glass out anyway to repair the joint. So the question is, do I replace the glass if I'm taking it out? And I might be tempted to do if I could find some that was like 2 millimeters or something like that. Okay, so there's our first repair as well. You can see the bezel is detached from the from its joint, but otherwise this just needs a bit of cleaning up, so no problem there either. Let's try not to drop all these parts.
Ken and Jeremy think the retaining ring is original, retaining wire is original.
Yeah,
but maybe the solder is not right.
Right, okay. So probably later glass then. So yeah, if somebody, I'm sure many people out there have these clocks where they believe that the glass is original or earlier. Can you measure it, please? And let me know, because that would be kind of quite cool to think about. Glass, again, I think there's a lot of sort of obsession about old glass or wavy glass. If you've followed our Fusey clock events on the Saturday Open Clock Club, that clock that we're going to finish this Saturday, also the glass got broke when in transportation coming here. So there's a company just down the road, well, Leeds, which is sort of like 25 miles down the road from us, who actually make cylinder glass. And so I'm going to try and see if I can buy a piece of glass from them and replace it with the wavy stuff. And it's a bit thinner as well, between 2 and 3 millimeters. Okay, so moment we've all been waiting for. Let's just zoom out a bit without. There we are, showing all the junk that's around here. So here's our clock. You see, I've moved the camera today, so it's overhead. I'll move it back next week. But I thought you'd get a kind of squarer view of it. So I believe, other than the dial, the numbers on the dial, I believe this finish is original. And again, I use that term advisedly because it hasn't been refinished. I think is probably the easiest way of putting it. It was really kind of, I spent a very happy hour this afternoon photographing this clock. Remember, I won't take you through the punishment of photographing it on air, but that to me is one of the key precursors. So it's part of the process. It's not before you start work. It's part of the work, the thinking and the photography. And of course, the beauty of photography is that it forces you to look at the object before you start changing things. And that's kind of really important. So I was really massively sort of impressed with the quality of this clock, which maybe I shouldn't have had any kind of preconceived ideas. But when you look at the decoration, for instance, it's incredibly finely incised. I presume that was done with a jig or a machine or something, and not done by hand per se. But you've got this really attractive sort of paint effect, marbled paint effect. And the paint has dried over the years, so it's kind of separated out and it's contracted. I've put some pictures on, I'll put some pictures on Facebook, but otherwise it's sort of massively still integral. You can see this part of the case has cracked, it shrunk across the grain and cracked, but that's fine, it's not wobbling about. You'll notice here, look, that the winding arbor is no longer aligned with the dial aperture, and I'll show you why a bit later on. What else? Oh, this I presume is the patent regulator, which is a wheel that you turn. Looks a bit when I like it might have a platform escapement, but it doesn't. It's a little wheel that changes the effective length of the pendulum. In fact, if you look at this, you'll see there's no way of regulating the pendulum. It's just casting to the loop, so all the regulation is up here. Yep. Two questions.
Sam said, is it slate?
No, it's wood.
Right.
Wood.
Thank you. And Derek says, what's that slot in the middle of the dial?
Oh, well, there you go, Derek. As to regulate it, there's no regulation on the pendulum bob. It's a little wheel, and presumably that pulls the suspension up through chops. In fact, we had somebody on another Facebook group, do you remember their name, Rachel, who said about the pendulum being at the front of the dial? All right, okay. Just before we started, somebody saying the pendulum on these is between the crutch and the pendulum between the back of the dial and the front of the movements. It's kind of like under dial work, and that's how you regulate it there. The camera's a little bit overexposed, but it says fast and slow on there. So yeah, really impressed with the quality of this case and with the state of preservation. Those of you that follow our group know that this is how I like my clocks. And I'm really happy just to leave it like this. Yeah, the dial, somebody's gone over the numbers with a Sharpie pen or a pencil or something. So they're a little bit inexpert, you might say, but that's cool. I can live with that. We've got some, let's just zoom in here a bit and just cool off the camera if I can without. It's ignoring me.
On the slot, it's regulating.
Yeah, there's a little kind of knurled wheel, which you might not be able to see there. And you can see it says fast and slow. So you wiggle that wheel and it pulls the suspension spring up through chops to change the effective length of the pendulum, I suppose. Just like a French clock does, but it doesn't have the little key, the Broco key at the midday position. So we can see the bezel has been opened wide and it's damaged the case a bit. And the joint there has got a lot of kind of blobs of soft solder on it. So we dealt with plenty of soft soldering on our other live stream clock, so we can deal with that. But I presume, lost the bezel, that originally these holes weren't for screws, but they were for rivets. And if we look at the joint, the bezel here, and get the camera to focus, maybe, yeah, there are drilled holes here. So presumably it was riveted on. Maybe the glass broke, somebody took the rivets out, who knows? So I think it's riveted on. So we can replace those rivets, although looking at the joint, maybe it's been cut through. So a bit more investigation to be done. Interesting that unlike a French clock that's got a snap groove on the front and back bezel, this is a taper. So it doesn't seem to have any snap. It's just sort of angled like that, the bezel, pressed bezel, and a bezel pushes onto it. So very kind of clock-making answer to that sort of problem. But I mean, otherwise, I think this is really, it's been in somebody's garage for 40 years, I think 38 years. The customer said the clock had been there. So it's pretty grimy, which we're going to start dealing with in a minute. So again, it's in-size decoration, which was maybe done with a pantograph, maybe done just with a jig and some sharp tool, I don't know. And then originally it appears to have been filled with either gilt or with gold paint. I don't know that either, but so many questions. So
Ken said he loves the hands.
Yeah, I presume those hands are original and they're a little bit rusty, surface rust, but we'll just deal with that with a bit of steel wool. I won't be rebluing the hands. I'll leave them as they are. But yeah, nice to see that. And I'm sure, in fact, in this book, which I led to believe is very good, the Ingram Clocks and Watches by Tran Du Li, presumably there's a whole story in there about the relationship between the French clock market and the American clock market and the German clock market as well. Because, of course, the Americans were leading the way in this sort of interchangeable manufacturing. The French clocks are not interchangeable parts. Presumably these are, but they appear to have got their design cues from French clocks, and maybe following in behind 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know, but that's a whole kind of social history question.
Jeremy says he thinks the glass is far too heavy, which is why the hinge is broken.
Yeah, I think that could be the case. So if anybody's got a clock like this, that I agree, Jeremy, it just feels far too chunky with its original glass. If you can measure the glass, please, I'd really appreciate that. Maybe we can get a bit of a thinner piece of glass to replace it with. So we've got cast brass feet. Let's just zoom out a little bit. In fact, tell what we'll do. We'll just tip it up. I don't want to grunch it about too much because it's quite grubby and I don't want to sort of rub the dirt in. Move the keyboard a bit.
Ken likes the green adamantine as well.
Oh, is that what it was called? Yeah. Yeah, really nice. I mean, presumably whoever decorated these cases decorated hundreds, if not thousands of them. So that marbling with the paint is incredibly sort of competent, which is really nice to see. Now, underneath, as you can see, really surprised at the condition. I don't know what this is about. These two screw holes. Almost looks like it's had another foot there, but presumably it didn't. Or was there a central foot? Not particularly convinced by that idea, but it seems maybe that was one answer to it. Yeah, we've got our feet here, which again, interestingly, let's just shift that keyboard, get that so you can see it. I'm pretty sure this is a lacquer finish and not a gold paint finish. As I said before, when shellac lacquer degrades, it goes this kind of dark yellow color, which is what you find on things like musical instruments, and looks like gilding, but it's not gilding. Oh, I see the feet are just flat. Underneath, that was blue tack on there for a minute. So this is nice. Might actually take the feet off just to wash them. Bit of movement here on the case. I think that's probably relatively recent. But again, any case that's made out of wood like this is constantly going to be expanding and contracting. Particularly, as I said, this was in a garage and then it's been here quite a few months now. So presumably it's shrunk a bit and we've started to see these joints opening up a bit. Here we've got the nut for the bell or gong standard. And yeah, I think this bit of wood is original. Here's another question. This kind of slots in, it's pinned in, but it slots into a rebate. So this aperture here, was that covered in textile originally to prevent ingress of dust? Presumably it's there to let the sound out, but I wonder whether it was to prevent ingress of dust.
Sam says not brass, maybe spelter rather than brass, perhaps.
Oh, good point. Because of the color. Yeah, you're probably right, Sam. Let's just have another look. Let's just flip it back and have a look under an eyeglass. Yeah, I think you're right, Sam. Sorry, I should have twigged on that. Yeah. Yeah. Gold star to Sam for being super observant. Not brass. You're absolutely right. So some kind of white metal. You can see there where it's worn through. So yeah, some kind of zinc-based spelter or something like that. Yeah, some kind of white metal.
There's a very big demand for the hands to be re-blued, and so that they can learn how to do it.
Oh, that ain't gonna happen. That is not gonna happen. Why on earth would you want to do that? Learning how to do it is fine. We'll just get some bit of steel and well, I'll try and show you how to do it. It's really tricky. As I go around, over the past few months after lockdown, my kind of practice is getting busier and busier, which is great. No complaints there. But the number of clocks I see with hands that are re-blued, and they're invariably like stand out like sore thumbs, either because the rest of the clock, white I don't get it. All the bluing's really poor. It's so difficult to do it. And I've spent dozens and dozens of hours with students bluing either in bluing salts, which is a salt that melts at about the right temperature for bluing hands. But bluing salts are really dangerous. I presume nobody uses them anymore because if something like water gets into them, then they kind of explode in your face like a chip fat. Yeah, somebody explain what chip fat is for the people who don't live in the north. Anyway, it's what we eat. It's what northerners eat the whole time. They don't eat anything else, just chip fat, things that have been fried in chip fat. Anyway, what was it about? Oh, bluing. Yeah, so you can go down the line of trying it on brass filings. You can do it on sand. You can do it on a brass plate. George Daniels, he shows blowing his hands under a wine glass. Of course he does. But they're watch hands, somewhat different. It's really difficult. By all means, I'm happy to talk about it. I'll get hold of some brass filings from somewhere. But if the hands are like this, and you can clean them with a bit of 4-0 steel wool and some microcrystalline wax, I would say leave them as they are, because inevitably they'll look a whole lot worse when they're blued than before you start. But new making, if you're saying, Matthew, we're all keen to get started making our new clock, then bring it on and I will do what I can to help you. But these hands are not going to get reblued. Sorry. So feeling slightly undemocratic. So I'll show you the top because of the sort of condition. Obviously, this thing's been in the garage, so it's had things put on top of it. You see all this scratching. And here we've got quite a good old buildup of dust. Now, dust is problematic in the sense that if it's allowed to build up long enough, it kind of becomes concreted. So we'll be able to remove some of that. In fact, we're going to do that tonight or this evening, get the kind of worst of the dust off by vacuuming, and then we'll do some washing, but I'm not going to do any sort of refinishing. So the answer with dust is to have good housekeeping. It's what the National Trust do, and people like that, they're constantly dusting and vacuuming dust. And that's a bit of a difference, actually, because, of course, if you dust, as in like the old way with a yellow duster or a brush, kind of all you do is you put the dust into the air and then it lands on something else. So you really want to be vacuuming when you're dusting things, but it's important to keep the dust off, otherwise it becomes impacted. And then once an object goes through a more humid sort of environment, either dew point or something, then that dust forms a kind of concretion almost, and it's really difficult to get off.
A bit earlier,
yeah,
Ken said the word pot metal.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I presume, Ken, I think there are all sorts of them. My co-author, John, works on old cars a lot, and he's always talking about, is it Bavitt metal that used for big end bearings in cars? So there's a whole range of white metals, low melting temperature, white metals that are typically zinc-based. Some have got a lot of copper in them, pewter-type materials that have been used over the years as relatively inexpensive replacements for brass, if you like, and then they're covered with paint or gilding or something like that to simulate. I'm trying to think of there's Muntz metal, isn't there, as well? I'm sure somebody's done a research project where they list all these names and they put all the constituents there. But again, I'm sure somebody already knows what the constitute of those feet are. But I imagine it's zinc-based, I imagine. So we've got some dusting to do here. Just a little note on the condition again. You can see on the corner, there's some damage. And we could infill that if we wanted to kind of just get the camera to focus, if it will. We could infill that with some acrylic paint or something if we wanted to sort of just hide that damage. I'm not bothered about it. There's plenty to do without doing that. But yeah, on the corners, it's got a bit rubbed. And of course, we have to consider here as well the same thing. You know, where one of those unanswerable questions, but something to consider is where does this where does the where become desirable? You know, I can't remember where we were now, but we were walking past a sort of posh-ish kitchen shop and noted that the kitchen drawers and cupboard doors of new work has been rubbed back with sandpaper or something to make it look exactly like this, where it's kind of worn on the corners. Same for guitars. I see nowadays you get these kind of custom shop guitars where they make the guitar and they lacquer it or paint it, and then they get some abrasive and they kind of skillfully rub it back to get this kind of look. So anyway, discuss. So the exciting bit, I've been putting off looking at the mechanism for obvious reasons in this attempt to get people to consider the sort of wider picture before jumping in. Now I'm actually just going to put, sorry, still teasing you, transit blanket down again, just to prevent it sort of sitting in its own muck, as it were. Did it not go in the hands and go down very well?
Earlier there was a semicircular hole.
Yeah, underneath.
So, right, and Jeremy said, is it to jiggle the pendulum?
Ah, good point, Jeremy. Yes, good. I'm glad you're all here tonight because my brain is like, yeah, totally could be. That's a really good point. I'll just hang the pendulum on. So Jeremy's point is the clock stopped. Let's just move it around. It's run down. Can you put your fingers under there? Yeah. Oh, so Sam and Jeremy both got gold stars. They're out in the lead, like Shergar and Red Rum. So there's your next decision. Who's going to be Shergar and who's going to be Red Rum? Oh, by the way, don't pick the clock up by the top like I'm doing here, because with a French clock, the top will fall off and it will land on your phone. Right. Okay. You're right, Jeremy. That's exactly what that's for. So the answer is no, it didn't have a textile over it to let sound out. That's not what it's for. Gosh, I've learned more tonight than I've learned in the past 20 years of clockmaking. Excellent. Right. So I'm just going to put this transit blanket down. If you don't own transit blankets, why not? They are the most useful thing. Right, like an amateur hitting my microphone. Right, okay, that'll just stop it from kind of grinding away with some dust. Just pop it down. So here's the movement. So yeah, I mean, again, as an American clock, I'm not quite an American clock novice, but it has been it's been a long time. A little bit underexposed now, but anyway, I was really impressed with the quality of the case, and it appears to be some kind of hardwood, which is cool, and screwed construction. You can just see the screws under there. Look, that's one. This yellow paint's quite cool as well. I don't know what that is. Oh, the back's missing. So there's a job to get a piece of. I'll probably just use a piece of plywood, I think, and make a new back. It's one of those things that would be quite nice to draw it on CAD and get it laser cut or something, or I could just get a piece of board like this. It's about 1/4 of an inch and make a back. So the back's completely missing, but yeah, really high quality construction. You can see that there are critters no longer with us, I'm afraid, in that sense. So we've got a cast iron gong standard, and I've learned this as well, that we've got hour striking on a gong, the cathedral gong, that's better. And then we've got passing striking on a bell, on a single bell. So the passing striking's on a half hour. So passing striking, you sometimes find it on skeleton clocks, and it's just a simple lever on the minute wheel or something like that, lifts a hammer, and it falls back with a spring. Whereas the cathedral gong is linked to the striking train. So this strikes the hours, and this strikes the half hours on a single bell. It's count wheel striking, I presume. No sign of the count wheel. It's there. It's hidden under the gong, under the bell, I mean. And otherwise, not a whole lot to report in there. Really good condition. No sign of furniture, beetle, woodworm, although again, I'm not particularly fussed about that. People sort of obsess about it. And one question I had when I first put this up on Facebook a few months ago was, what are these plates made out of? And considering I didn't know what the feet were made out of, I didn't think it through. It's just kind of reflecting quite a lot of light there. But are they nickel plated brass? They look quite white here, but they look incredibly white. Or in fact, are they steel? I don't know.
What are you talking about?
The plates.
Plates.
Yeah, are they nickel plated brass, or are they steel? Or are they something that I don't know anything about, which wouldn't be a surprise. So the good thing here is, unlike our long case clock, basically everything's there. In theory, it's just a case of taking it apart, washing it, popping it back together, put some oil on it, and we'll be done, other than making the back. Just noticed now, with sitting at this slightly unusual angle, that the piece of material that is in the, you can see it there, just try and tip it up so you can see, there we are. The piece of material in the gong hammerhead has worn away off, or degraded. So it's hitting on the metal. So I'll probably replace that. I guess it's leather in there. Could be a kind of form of rubber or something, but presume, like a French clock, it's a piece of leather. Could put a bit of boxwood in there, a bit of pegwood or something. But I would, you could just leave it as it is. But with the hammerhead hitting the gong, it's, you know, a little bit grim.
Derek and Ken say the plates are steel.
Oh,
Derek says steel with brass bushes.
great. Well, thank you very much. That's interesting. I presume it's just that brass was more expensive and difficult to come by, so they made them out of steel. That makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, I can see now. Thank you for that. I can see the little brass bushes in there. Thankfully, this clock hasn't been bushed by the look of it. I guess they had these kind of extended sort of barrel arbor bushes, and that kind of makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, I've just on a total learning journey tonight, because now I see why people like the idea of those extended so-called top hat winding arbor bushes, because they see them in American clocks, and not that they're a bad idea, but there's a big difference between putting them into clocks that never had them and bushing these holes, I guess. So we'll go through our regular bushing process, which is, of course, is nothing to do with bushing. It's only to do with depthing in the first instance. I'll show you that in the next week or something, on the week after, once we get the whole thing apart. But otherwise, I've learned 10 things, and that's really cool. Very happy about that. Spiders everywhere. There we are, spider webs. Okay, we can see that the striking train is fully wound, and the going train springs are a little bit rusty looking, but I think it's mostly just dried up oil by the look of it. Otherwise, I think we're all good to go. Just see if it actually runs.
On the wood, Matthew,
Yeah.
did you say it was plywood?
No, I said that I'll put plywood in the back.
Oh, Sam says, wouldn't that off gas?
You might do. Good point, Sam. Yeah.
Says maybe all timber does that, so not relevant.
Yeah, I mean, things like oak do. You get acetic acid from oak. So yeah, you could do. I mean, what I would, if you were worried about that, it's a really good point. So what Sam's saying is that when you introduce a new material to an object, if it's in a kind of heritage or museum environment, what you do is you make sure that that material is as kind of neutral as possible, so it doesn't impact on the object around it. And famously, oak, when it's new in particular, off gases acetic acid. So if you've got something like lead in the object that's been stored in an oak bound frame, then you'll get lead acetate forming. MDF, some MDFs give off formaldehyde. So what you can do in the old days, you used to do a thing called an oddie test, where you get a little bit of that material, you put it in a test tube with some water, a silver, lead, and a copper token, and you look at the amount of corrosion. And today, of course, it can be done with more sophisticated forms of analysis. If you want to introduce something like a board here, you could use Perspex. I wish I wouldn't keep hitting the microphone. You could use Perspex, I suppose, which presumably is pretty neutral. And you could see the back. Let's consider that. Day-glow Perspex, that would be quite nice. Or what we used to do in the old days, I don't know whether they still do it, is to paint the wood with paraloid B72, so an acrylic varnish to kind of seal it in, and then paint on some aluminium foil to make a barrier. So you can do that. But really good point, Sam. Although actually here with the pendulum Jeremy Dodd special pendulum starting aperture, there's probably not a lot of opportunity for that environment to be kind of sealed in. That is a problem where you get sealed environments.
They're not happy with woodworm.
Why not?
It makes the wood friable, weakens the wood.
It does if it gets really, really, really bad. But in the most domestic environments, woodworm is partly due to housekeeping or lack of housekeeping. That open end grain of wood that the furniture beetle absolutely loves. If in a domestic house where the RH is pretty low, central heating and reasonable housekeeping, so vacuuming every so often, my experience is that people get really obsessed about woodworm or furniture beetle unnecessarily. Yeah, if it's in an outdoor shed or something. I remember when we cleared out my granddad's workshop, every bit of wood was like completely wrecked. It just crumbled to nothing. But in most environments like this, it isn't going to be a problem. And you can keep your eye out for frass, but yeah. So other things are going to kill me before the woodworm does. Anyway, yeah, I can't see any here, so I'm not fussed about it. I think, yeah, it seems to be one of those things. It's like a good excuse to put chemicals on something. If you do have historic work that's got, you think might have some kind of insect infestation, then you can freeze it, which is useful. So wrap it in polythene and stick it in the deep freezer for 48 hours. Do that with textiles and things. Or there's a company in London called Thermolignum. And what they do is they raise, I think, the temperature, but keep the RH the same, irrespective of temperature. And we had that done with a few long case clog hoods and things like that. So might want to look up Thermolignum and see if they're still on the go. But that seems like a good way of doing it, whereas you don't really want to be putting chemicals on it. Can't quite see the point, but anyway. So there we are. There's the movement. I think it's going to be quite straightforward. We'll need clamps for these springs when we take it apart next week. I've got some weathering use for another clock at the moment, but all right, that's what I was going to say. We just look up here if we can see with the light, just about, that's better. These two top holes have been moved. So presumably I don't think this movement's been replaced. I think what's happened is the threads have stripped in the case, and rather than plugging the hole and gluing it and things, somebody's just moved the screws in the top two straps only to a new position. And that's meant they haven't kind of quite squared up the movement. So the winding arbor isn't quite in line with the aperture in the dial. But I don't think, I know we're always looking for doom and gloom, but I don't think this is bad news, this clock. I think it is, just seeing that, look. Pencil mark on the back, 245, does it say? What was the number? Oh, 701, it's not that. say 246 or 245. Let's have a look. So obviously handling is going to smudge that probably. Just have a look. .245, I think. So always interesting to look for things like that, repair marks and stuff. You sometimes find them underneath. And I think it was Matthew Condon who said that the maker's mark is probably or maybe stamped on the front plate of the movement. So I say, in order to do our vacuuming, which I'm really looking forward to before 7:30, just get the movement out and we can start vacuuming, which is the best part of the whole project. So let's just undo this nut here. So as I said, I spent a happy hour doing photography. So I don't think I quite finished sort of explaining why that's important, because if you don't make a record of where you were, at least, I mean, a visual record is only part of the record, of course, but how do you know where you're going, and how do you then sort of assess where you've got to and evaluate the project in terms of, did you make what you feel are good decisions? Would you do it differently next time, and so on? Because you just forget. One forgets. I forget.
Jack said flat spring retainers, not round, because round ones slip.
Right. Okay. In which case, then I might have to make some. I've made them before out of sheet brass, out of a bit of 1/8" brass. Thank you for that, Derek. I was looking for another job, so you're giving me another part of the project. So I'm going to use my parallel jaw pliers here. I need to stand up a bit. So this is really rusted, which it isn't. You might want to put a bit of penetrating oil or paraffin or something on there. So I'm using one of my favorite tools nowadays, parallel jawed brass lined pliers for this nut. So again, what I'd normally do is to take photographs before and after. That's really cool. Just ease that out. There we go. What's really nice about this is that I think the nut's got an integral washer. Yeah, it has. Don't think it's glued on. No, it's got an integral washer, so it's a cast nut with an integral washer. Really nice. Sort of harks back to, well, I don't know, no doubt the Greeks did this, but John Harrison was a big fan of these screws and nuts with integral washers. And of course, you see them today on modern electronics and things. So that's really nice. And in terms of condition, everything's cool here, a bit rusty, but I'll wash it and then again use my sort of steel wool and a bit of Renaissance wax at the end. So that's nice. Very happy with that. Held in with a wedge. Some of them, I think the that I've seen are cast round. Yeah, the casting is actually round the end of the gong, but in this case, it appears to be wedged in there. So you could probably get that out if you wanted, but I'm not going to try. No maker's mark on it that I can see. No. Good.
Do you have to be careful with the hands?
When it's laid down like this? Yeah, I don't think they're, I think the front of the case extends, doesn't it? Yes, it does. So here, if we just look, the front of the case extends quite a long way. But yeah, absolutely. With long case clocks and their transportation, what I like to do is to lay them, once it's off the seat board and everything, is to lay the clock dial down, but then to interleaf the hands with acid-free tissue, slightly going off course. But one day I'll do probably a video about moving a long case clock. And the problem with a long case clock is that when you transport it, of course, all the weight is on the dial feet. It tends to sort of damage the paint on a painted dial. So I find it's best to lay it down. So good question here. the hands are well out of arm's reach. However, the old transit blanket is very useful. Now, I noticed before.
Is it a steel wedge or wood?
Good question. I think it's steel. Yeah, it's steel or iron or something. Yeah, in the gong. Good question there. So the in this case, as we know from our Smith-Enfield clocks, there are broadly two ways of retaining minute hands. One is with a pin, a tapered pin and a collet, and the other one is like this, where you've got a threaded threaded nut, which of course has been gotten at with pliers and things. I can just unscrew the nut. There we are. And I wonder if it's got any knurling on. Slightly surprised if it isn't knurled, because how on earth are you expected to? No. I mean, that's a little bit surprising, because you would expect the nut to be knurled so you can grip it, but it isn't, and I don't. Maybe it's not original, but it's cut away at the back to allow the hand to sit flat. So it looks okay and it fits well. Somebody on the Facebook the other day was asking about what thread it is on these clocks. I presume it's an imperial type thread. I know Americans still use imperial measurements, inches and so on. So it's probably an imperial thread, I guess. But again, I don't know definitively. Some tweezers.
If the back was there and fixed, it would have to be taken out of the front, he thinks. Does he mean
I don't think you can, Jeremy, because the screws are from the back. You just the back is screwed on, so it's a bit of a pain to get the movement out if it's the back there. But you just unscrew the back. It's not permanently fixed, I think, is the answer. Or it slid down, but I don't think it did. Saying that, the base does seem to be as I said, let into a rebate. So I suppose what would be really good was if we could find another case like this that's not got that part missing and have a look at it, or get one that's kind of fallen to bits and we can have a look at it. So we can see there our bluing that we all know and love so much on the back, and the remains of it on the front there on the hand. Yeah, sorry about the hands. Happy to blue some random old bits of steel. And then our hand probably just fits on a collet. So you, rather than just pulling the hand off, if you just rotate it, sorry, my hand's in the way, like that, it'll come off. So brass collet, split collet, just like a French clock, basically. So yeah, nice hands. Flat, unlike, actually a little bit of shaping on there, but basically kind of like that flat fleur-de-lis design. Nice hands. Good. Let's get might as well get the dial off now we're here. So I think I mentioned before on the other live stream, when you got multiple screws like this, I'm not particularly bothered about getting them mixed up because they may have already been mixed up. However, you might want to just make a piece of card and make some crosses in that card with a scalpel and put the screws in there so you know where to put them back when you've taken it all apart. Really useful. So just thinking ahead to the case and cleaning, I'm going to vacuum it, which we'll see a little bit in the next half an hour. And that's the wrong tool for the job. And I'm going to then wash it with deionized water, isopropyl alcohol and Vulpex soap, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then I think that's going to be it. Might do some touching in, as I say, on the losses, but actually maybe not. Yes. So I think this bezel and dial will lift away, leaving the movement, in place. So we've got 3 brass screws. Yeah, 1, 2, 3 little domed head brass screws. So that's cool. They're all nice. And ta-da. Okay. So just looking for any repair marks on the back here, which I can't see. So this piece of steel or iron plate is tin plated by the look of it. And that's what I thought maybe the movement plates were. It's basically what people used to call tin or tin plate. So it's a bit of steel that's plated. You can see most of the plating is being used up through the sort of electrolytic process. And there are some very short little riveted tabs. 2 of them have broken away. And then we've got our slightly troublesome joint here, which has got a wire repair, or was wired on, I don't know. No, I see. I think this hinge or joint is from a bit of furniture, isn't it? It's nothing to do with this clock. I think that was riveted on originally. It'd be really great if we could find somebody who had one that they felt was in original condition. So it looks like, okay, got 2 layers here. So you've got this kind of embossed, machine embossed brass layer, then the steel underneath, onto which are painted these white plaques with pencil, basically now. Cool, very happy with that. Just dusty, but yeah, we need to figure out what to do with this joint eventually. So we can see our movement. Let's just have a little look. I noticed that the striking train is working fine. That's good. I hadn't adjusted the hammer so it doesn't hit the gong anymore. That's all cool and nice. Oh yeah, so there's our maker's stamp. I'll put that on Facebook. That's as much as I can zoom in. And it says, you probably know what it already says. Oh, it's Bristol, Connecticut. Really nice to see that. And I'll photograph it better later. This is a regulator, patent regulator. As I said, what it does, the suspension springs here at the side. So it moves. Okay, so it's the suspension spring is kind of fixed at the top. So this arrangement with the wheel on this thread moves up and down this vertical arbor at the side, pulling the suspension spring up and down, which moves it through these chops here, effectively shortening or lengthening it. We've got the normal arrangement as with American clocks of this, I don't know what you call that bit of material, but retains the pallets on the pallet arbor. And then we've got our escape wheel. So let's just have a look at the action of our escapement. Not much power on there, so can't really. Yeah, it looks in good condition. I'm pretty sure, I can't see at the moment, the pallet arbor or the pivot is adjustable in terms of depthing. So you've just basically got exactly the same arrangement that we've got with the Enfield clock, but the whole thing is kind of inverted. You've got the pallets underneath rather than on top, which I think is probably better for oil retention. So no worries. That was another question I've got for people who know these clocks better than I do. What was the winding key like? I'll probably make a new brass winding key or buy one, but what was the original one like? Was it steel? Was it signed with the maker's name? And I'll have a route about in my drawer to find out whether I've got one. So yeah, we can see here, looking underneath where the case has moved, so shrunk, but it's a little bit wobbly.
Ken says, is that a deadbeat escapement? Is it a stick?
I don't think it is, Ken. I was very excited when I first saw it because I thought the same thing, but I don't think it is. I think there's recoil there, isn't it? I know a lot of these clocks are, and it's got forward-facing escape wheel teeth, but I did notice some recoil, so it might be deadbeat. It's what I thought when I first saw it. I'm going to stick my head in the way. Yeah, I think it is. I think you're right, Ken. So well done. So we've got a third. I only know the name of 2 racehorses. So we've got a third racehorse in our race now. Yeah, it's a deadbeat escapement. So that's great because I missed a clock with a deadbeat escapement on eBay. I was going to buy it to demonstrate the deadbeat. So we can do it here. And of course, we've got that great non-problem actually, where the pivots wobble in the holes. And so I'm going to do everything in my power to resist doing any bushing, but we might have to do some. But anyway, let's cross that bridge when we get to it. So actually, really exciting. Yeah, the case here is loose. It's all a bit wobbly. Maybe we can just put. I saw the other day, can't remember where I was now, looking at some clock where I was at their railway museum here. Somebody had reinforced the underside of a long case clock hood with a piece of linen cloth and hide glue. So maybe just do that on the inside just to prevent it from wobbling about and dropping down maybe. But otherwise, good show. So let's whip the movement out. And we can then start vacuuming. Must start vacuuming before past.
I'm sure that it is that.
It's deadbeat.
Yeah. I'm going to give them a gold star.
Yeah. Oh, well done. Well done. That if anybody who's turned up tonight and remembered, I should have a gold star.
But Jeremy wants to know, can you trade in the gold stars?
Yeah, of course you can.
Like Ian said, like green shield stamps.
Exactly. Oh, gosh, Ian, you're showing your age. Now you'll have to explain to oh no, maybe everybody knows what green shield. Harriet. She's not there. I think Harriet is very embarrassed by old people who get tokens out of their purse at the supermarket checkout. She wants to disappear through a hole in the ground. Yeah. Do you know what green shield stamps are? Do you know what green shield stamps are?
No, what are they?
All right, that's okay.
What are
they? It's like a token system that old people used to use when they you'd save them up and then you could buy a tin of beans or something like that.
Oh, like food vouchers.
Like vouchers, yeah. That's an 18-year-old doesn't know what green shield stamps are. Right. Okay, screw there, still holding on. I'm sure you could buy really useful things with green shield stamps. I remember them being like the most exciting thing when we were young. We used to look through these catalogs to look out of things you could buy. You'd save up 5 million of them. Anyway. Not part of an 18-year-old's experience. Right.
Jeremy says, do the winding squares wind in opposite directions?
Good question, Jeremy. We'll have a look. So yeah, I'm really kind of surprised by this screwed construction. You can see the screws in the side here. It's sort of like, well, it's not sort of, it's just really good quality. Some glue as well. So screwed and glued. Cool. Really, really nice. You can see there. So so here's a sort of, well, not a question, but what do you do? I think I would be tempted to plug up these holes with a bit of wood and some animal glue and re-drill a pilot hole and put the screws back kind of in the position they were, only to get that pallet arbor, the winding arbor, sorry, aligned. Okay, so we've got a lot of vacuuming to do on the inside. I'm not going to start there. I'm just going to start on the top, I think. And so this is before washing or whatever. This is just to get rid of that loose dust that's sitting around on the surface. Do we want to have a look? I'm sure we do want to have a look at the movement first, but maybe we can save that joy till next week. So yeah, lots learned tonight.
Derek bought a stereo with 27 books of green shield stamps.
Oh, stereo. Gosh, what a joke. Right. So the patent for this was in 1878 and then in November 79. Presumably that's a patent for the regulator. Really cool. Yes, Jeremy, you're right. The striking side winds, just pop that across there without whacking the microphone. So the striking train winds clockwise and the going train winds anti-clockwise. There's a lot else here to see. Very kind of shallow and wide teeth. Lantern pinions. We haven't worked on a lantern pinion clock, have we? So that's also really cool. That'd be interesting to do the depthing exercise with those lantern pinions. And these bits of wire, I was asking on Facebook what these bits of wire were like when they came from the factory. Presumably they were neater than they are here. But how were they done? How were they fitted? Was it brass wire? So many questions. So I guess these two straps have been moved. Yeah, they're just loose, look. So that's okay. We can move those. So kind of move them back.
Do you know what the green inside the case? There's green discoloration.
Yeah, I don't know. It's paint, but don't know whether that's original or not. No idea. Is it something to do? Yeah, it's paint. I noticed that when I first took it apart in there, look. Is it something to do with the marbling? Yeah, it must be, mustn't it? Look, it's the same color or similar color. So, although that's a different piece of material, but I think that's too much of a coincidence. You look at the marbling and look at the colors in there. Why, I don't know, because that would never be visible. I don't think it's been marbled. It just happens to have been painted for some reason. Maybe they used that bit of material to rest the others on or practice. And the same down here, look, there's more of the same kind of color there. I mean, the great thing about these clocks, there's a chap in London, I'm sure there are many Americans who have studied these clocks sort of intimately, called Peter Gosnell. He did a lot of work on the American clock manufacturing process. So I am totally not the right person to pass any kind of view or opinion on this clock. But what I would say in my own defense is that by adopting, as I said, sound like a scratched record, speaking of hi-fis or gramophones or stereos, that by just basically taking it apart, washing it, putting it back together, we are respecting, quote unquote, all this stuff in here and not making any kind of judgment about it. But it would be cool to know. So if we know anybody, if you know anybody, let's see if we can get hold of them and we could have a bit of a wider discussion about the case. Yeah, this rebate is really interesting. I wonder whether this piece of material originally was meant to slide in and out. That would kind of make sense, really. It's only got one nail here that's holding it in, but maybe it was meant to sliding in and out with a gong on it. Anyway, vacuuming. So I'm just going to use a natural bristle brush. And where's our vacuum cleaner? Where's my brush? just to start with. I'm going to vacuum the front just to basically gather up this loose material, and then we can think about washing the case. So here's our brush, just using a kind of natural bristle brush with a taped ferrule so it doesn't scratch. And I've got my vacuum cleaner hose. So we're just going to go along. I won't spend too long doing it online because it's obviously not the most exciting thing. As I said, if you're dusting, don't just dust randomly, particularly around clocks, because again, I don't know, it's still the same advice. You can still hear me with the vacuum on, but the National Trust actually used to say, don't dust the clock cases, because what it does is it makes this kind of like cloud of dust that lands on the movement and lands on the oil. So you can see that quite a lot of this dust is lifting away, but it's certainly not leaving it kind of, well, it's never going to be as it once was. So just doing this quickly, I can spend more time on it offline. You might actually, because we don't know what's in this dust, this clock's been around for 120 years. So although I'm catching most of it in here, again, if you're asthmatic or sensitive to dust, I just want to be super careful. I've got my extractor, which I don't want to get in the way here with the camera, but you could wear a respirator with a particle filter on it just to kind of catch things, which would be quite nice, I think. You don't want to be really breathing this stuff in if you can help it. Now I'd like to, I'll just rest that only so you can see. So we're going to get rid of some of the spiders in here. There they go, all up the tubes. I bet this is the first time they've seen live stream vacuuming, haven't they? Oh, they'll probably watch it the whole time, actually, knowing that lot. So lots of spiders going in the bag. Got a HEPA filter on this vacuum. If you're going to vacuum like this, then it's useful to have a HEPA filter on there. So just gathering up most of this kind of loose dust here. And just whiz around the outside as well. Let's see, look at that, we can see it a bit better. So brushing out the corners. It'll be interesting to see how this painted surface cleans when we wash it next week. And actually, with some of the loose dust removed, you can see where either mold has formed or droplets of water have formed or been dropped onto the case. Maybe it's been out in a shower or something, and that's actually caused the dust to be more sort of cemented to the surface. Another crack there through the screw hole. Yeah, it'd be quite good fun to take these feet off and give them a separate kind of wash. Just doing this very quickly. People pay good money to watch this. Right. Yeah, really a kind of attractive sort of patina on these white metal feet. It'd be interesting to know whether they were gilt originally. I think they probably were looking at the underside, but that's completely gone from these sort of visible surfaces now. And I'm really sort of happy with the overall sort of look of this thing. I think it's really, really attractive. And again, without wanting to bang on about it too much, because the whole thing is sort of, well, degraded, tarnished, so on, evenly. You can see here, look around the bezel, how the clock presumably originally was gloss, and now the paint has degraded or shrunk, and it's this kind of mottled black finish now. So lots and lots still to learn from this case. And as I said, it would be really great if we can find somebody who's got much more experience of these things than I have, or we have, and we could maybe get them on to talk about the cases and the construction and the materials and the thinking behind the kind of design. Just looking at those two pieces there, they're actually kind of canted up, but they don't appear to have moved. So presumably it was like that when it was first made. Lots to learn. Anyway, there we are. I think our second live stream clock is well and truly underway, and hopefully it won't turn into the marathon that the other one did. Yeah, really, I think important what this sort of, I mean, it's actually great talking it through with you people who are watching this evening and with the people who watch the recording, because of course, it just helps you to process so many thoughts that you might not normally go through if you were working on your own. So it's a kind of reflective journal almost. And yeah, I've learned a lot. Thank you for all your input. Everybody gets a gold star tonight. Regrettably, no more Green Shield stamps to hand out, but I'm sure if you go on eBay, you can still buy books of them. And I wonder whether Derek still got the stereo. I know we've still got my mum and dad's His Master's Voice stereo that was the first thing they bought when they got married. So these things still hanging around somewhere. Great. So next week, we're going to move on from vacuuming, which I'll do some more of offline, onto washing. And it'll be interesting to see how these painted surfaces react to that. I'm going to try a little bit just somewhere that's out of sight. And I'm going to make some plate mainspring holders. Good point, Derek. I do have the wire ones, but the plate ones are easy because you can hold them as well. And then we'll get the movement apart. We can look at the dead bit escapement. So exciting. So thanks very much. We will be back next week. We've got a week in about a month's time where I've got some contract work to do, so I won't be here, but I'll let you know about that at the time. In the meantime, please keep work in progress projects coming on Facebook, and it's only Thursday, isn't it? So we'll see you on Saturday, all being well, for the conclusion of our chain-driven fusee clock project, and we'll get that hung up on the wall. Okay, so thanks very much. Super special thanks to Team Open Clock Club, who's been doing all their correspondence throughout this hour and a half, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks very much, and bye for now. Yes.